Today I'm honored to introduce our distinguished guest speaker, Dr. Kim McDonough. Dr. Kim McDonough holds an MA in TESOL from our university, Michigan State University, and a PhD in Applied Linguistics from Georgetown University. Dr. Kim is currently a professor in the Department of Education at Concordia University. Dr. Kim has the main area of research in second language acquisition with a focus on how face-to-face interaction creates L2 learning opportunities and promotes L2 learning. She started her career working in the area of interactional feedback and how English L2 speakers perceive and respond to various feedback moves. This area also included classroom research about peer interaction, such as how students discuss language and give each other feedback. The feedback research led her to projects about the use of structural priming as a tool for eliciting specific grammatical structures and promoting L2 development. She then moved on to researching interactive writing tasks to explore the connections between student conversations and their written tests and writing development. Her most recent work has been investigating the visual component of face-to-face conversation, such as identifying nonverbal cues that signal communication breakdowns. She has also published research studies about individual differences, collaborative dialogue and task engagement, input frequency and distribution, and integrated writing. And today, she will discuss triangulating eye movements and other measures in interaction research. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Kim.
There you go. Now I can see you. Okay, so basically this is why I'm here, as you know. This is what I want to talk about. So I get this question a lot. Kim, why do you study face-to-face interaction? And then pre-COVID, it was always, we've moved beyond that. You know, people really don't, face-to-face communication isn't that so important anymore. You know, we're all texting each other now or chatting. Like, we're doing all sorts of things with technology that really makes your focus on face-to-face interaction seem really old-fashioned and out of date. I love the brutal honesty of people in the comments. In fact, I once gave a talk on face-to-face interaction, and afterwards someone came up and said, why didn't you just do the study online? Like, why did you bother getting people together to actually talk? I'm like, well, I don't know. I think it's kind of a fundamental thing in human communication that we actually talk to each other. And then I felt a little justified after the pandemic, because everyone was saying, oh, wow, we're all socially isolated and we're only interacting through screens and we really need to get back to that human contact. And I'm like, right? Did I not think that my whole career? All right, so you know why. I mean, I know you all know the SLA research of why it is that interaction is supposed to be useful. There's all the bullets here. I don't need to go through them. But for me, I think my original interest in interaction came from my experiences teaching English in Thailand, basically. And that was after I finished my bachelor's degree, before I came to Michigan State to learn about TESOL. And I was your typical native speaker plopped in a language class because I was a native speaker with no training in language or pedagogy. And what really jumped out at me in that context was that people just don't have enough time to actually talk. Right? They don't have opportunities to talk to each other. They don't have opportunities in class or outside of class to just interact with each other. And I think that's where my interest in interaction came from. So that's kind of like you heard in the introduction, that's pretty much what I do. So if you kind of look at, you know, oh, Kim does this and she did that and then she does this. And basically every 7 to 10 years, I get bored of a topic and I move on to a new topic. But all of them have to do with face-to-face interaction. Okay, so that's a consistent, constant throughout my whole career. So what have we looked at? So what have we actually used? Oh, sorry, I think I skipped a slide. Okay, why nonverbals? So that's kind of what I'm interested in these days. Well, why? I mean, I think these references can be updated, but really, you know, gestures and pointing, we know that's important for language learning. We know that facial expressions give us meaning and information about how conversation is going. And we also know that eye gaze is important, plays an important role in face-to-face communication. So in a traditional mainstream interaction approach to language learning, there's not a lot of emphasis on the nonverbals, really. I mean, if you go to conversation analysis, lots of focus on nonverbals, right? When was there a pause? When was there a laugh? When did the laugh start? How does it overlap with the linguistic context? But mainstream straightforward interaction research, not so much looking at this, instead more focused on language properties, linguistic features of the input, as opposed to the nonverbal aspect of the input. So we started back in, okay, so I should say all the research I'm going to be talking about today is collaborative. It's not just me. It's my frequent collaborator and colleague, Pavel Trofimovich, plus a whole host of graduate students that we've worked with over the last 10 years. So this is not a single person endeavor here. Okay. So one of the first things that we looked at, dating myself, novel pattern learning. So we were interested in whether or not anything to do with nonverbals and face-to-face interaction could make novel pattern learning easier. So we were working with Esperanto, which has flexible word order, and OVS is a very common word order. And this is very difficult for people to learn if they're used to relying on word order, right? So the subject is the noun that comes before the verb, the object is the noun that comes after the verb. And if you're teaching them a language where that is not always the case, then you really have to look to morphology to figure out who's doing what to whom. So we had done many lab experiments where we were providing different types of input to learners to try and figure out how can we make this more salient to them? How can we get them to learn that it's not word order that matters, it's the suffix on the object that matters. So whenever we would give them, pictures like these where it's fully reversible events and give them a sentence, if we said the object first, if we said zebron, meaning zebron being the object case of the zebra, but if we said that first, they would just assume it was the bottom picture where the zebra was kicking the deer, when in fact it's the deer kicking the zebra. And the only way you know that is because there's a suffix on the object. Well, nobody could learn this. I mean, our learning rates were horrible, like 30%, maybe 40%. And so we thought, oh, I know. Let's make it face-to-face interaction, because why would that help? Well, because we could include some gestures. So we could include some pointing to the relevant picture, okay, to the object, right, that has the suffix. We could use eye gaze. So we could, initiate eye gaze by making eye contact with the participant and then looking to the right picture, and hopefully they would follow our eye gaze. So that's what we started doing. We're like, okay, let's start looking at that. Well, it didn't work in the sense of the eye gaze. The pointing didn't work. So even when we pointed to the picture, it didn't have any effect. But looking how often the participant looked at the correct object matters. So if we could get their attention, and their eye gaze drawn to the right mapping of the form and the meaning on the picture, then they did better learning. Okay? And it was really the only predictor really about learning. So we thought, okay, so the eye movement seemed to be, this seems to be important here. So if we can get people looking at the right thing, great. Okay, they seem to learn better. But I must confess the learning levels were still pretty low. We're talking like maybe 54% if they were actually. So we decided, okay, that really wasn't super successful the way we thought it would be. So let's go back to kind of more typical or traditionally studied aspects of interaction instead of novel pattern learning. So we looked at recast. And we did a series of studies where we're like, okay, maybe recasts might be recognized as being corrective because they have some type of visual component to them, right? So we all know recasts, blah, 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 they don't work. People don't notice them as corrective. They don't respond to them by producing the target-like form. Why are we using them? And we thought, well, maybe, the eye gaze, like if the interlocutor was doing something with their eyes that made it more apparent to the learner that, hey, this is corrective, then maybe that's why recasts seem to be working, even though, yes, nobody responds to them and people can't actually tell you that, yes, I've been corrected. And there's something about the visual of the recast giver that flags this as an important interactional phenomenon that the learner should pay attention to. So we looked at, is there a difference in the eye gaze behavior before and during the recast, and we compared it with non-corrective repetition. So where the interlocutor is just repeating something that the learner said, but there's no error to fix, right? But very similar kind of context for where they occur, similar length, similar rising intonation. So a lot of similarities, but one was providing a correction and the other wasn't. So I thought, all right, well, let's look. Okay, what did we find? All right, mutual gaze. So if the speaker and the listener were looking at each other during the recast, then there tended to be some type of flag there that the listener thought, oh, okay, this is important, right? And they tended to provide more target-like responses, right? So there was something about that let's share glances at each other that made the recast salient enough that the learner would actually then incorporate it into their next utterance. And also the speaker eye gaze. So how long, the speaker was looking at the learner before or during the recast for non-corrective repetition, it was similar. So it wasn't so much that just the speaker, so the recast giver, looking at the learner wasn't sufficient for anything to elicit a target-like response. It was really whether or not it was shared. So it had to be kind of co-constructed, the eye gaze. It's like, I'm looking at your face, you're looking at my face, and okay, a light bulb is going on. And so that was all the recast stuff. And I'm like, yeah, dismissive, okay, whatever, recast. And now the new stuff. So the newer stuff is non-understanding. And why did we decide to look at non-understanding? It's kind of awkward, really. I'm sure we've all been in conversations where you haven't a clue what someone just said. And you're sitting there and you're like, oh, I haven't a clue what they just said. Should I ignore it and hope that later on it'll become clear? So if I just feign, yeah, I kind of think I know what you're saying, but I really don't. And hopefully you're going to say something next that'll make it clear to me. Or do you actually have to say, sorry, I could you repeat that, or I'm sorry, I didn't understand, or pardon me. And even after like one or two goes at that, if you still don't understand the person, it gets really embarrassing, right? It's embarrassing for you, it's embarrassing for the speaker. And I think during COVID, when we all had masks on, I think this happened a lot, right? Did you have trouble hearing people with their masks on? And then there was the plastic shield. So not only I have a mask on, you have a mask on, there's a plastic shield between us, and we're trying to communicate, and everybody started yelling at each other, right? We're all yelling at each other because nobody can hear. And it was really embarrassing to keep going, sorry, what, to the point that sometimes people would just lower their masks and say what they had to say and put it back up. So recognizing that, this is kind of awkward, plus people prefer self-repair. So we know from the conversation analysis work that there is a preference self-repair. So rather than me continue on and you have to embarrassingly say, hey, I don't understand you, I would rather just kind of my own accord, repair whatever I'm saying, right? Okay, so we thought, all right, well, maybe it would be useful to find out if there's some type of visual thing going on so that people don't have to ask for clarification. So if we can help people self-repair by letting people know, hey, if someone's face looks like this, it means that they don't understand and you should probably self-repair now, because if you don't self-repair, they're going to have to ask you for clarification. So what did we find out? Basically, holds are what we found out is going on. And holds had been discussed in the conversation analysis literature before, but we kind of, being typical quantitative researchers, said, let's quantify it. So we took this nice situationally embedded, well-described, elaborated upon concept from excerpts in CA research and said, let's do this quantitatively. So we looked at a corpus of English speakers chatting with each other, and we were just looking for breakdowns in the communication of meaning, clarification requests, to find out what was going on. And what we found is that holds, so they happen. And basically a hold is kind of if you're talking to me, you're chatting away, I'm the listener, and suddenly I don't understand you, I'm going to do something like this. And then once I start going, okay, so that freeze of the dynamic movement indicates that I haven't understood, and then the return to dynamic movement indicates that, yeah, I'm back with you. So you lost me temporarily, and I'm going to hold here until I'm back with you. And once I'm back with you, I'm going to continue moving like I'm moving right now. I'm standing, so I'm kind of swaying a bit. And those are holds. And what gets held the most in a hold is the eye gaze. So it's really the freezing of the look to the speaker that happens, where you kind of lock in and just stay there. And you don't look away until things have been resolved. But there's also forward leans, there's head pokes, there's tilts. So there's all sorts of things that go on when people hold, but it's eye gaze that we found to be most commonly held. Okay, so how did we do this? We originally, this was kind of our first stab at eye tracking. The setup kind of looked like this. This was the Face Lab system. This is our pilot study. And we have the two RAs sitting there, and you can see that we've got webcams behind them on tripods capturing each other. And then in front of them, we had the little cameras, which were part of the Face Lab system, sitting on this box. And then to the side, we had the two laptops running the eye tracking software so that we could track both people where they were looking, as well as the scene, so what they were looking at. And what we found during the pilot testing is that everybody kept kicking the tripods. Oops. Kind of makes sense. I mean, they're right there, and you know, we had to tell people, hey, don't move that much, just sit there. But of course, you know, people are going to move. It's natural. So the scene cameras kept getting knocked around. So it didn't work that well. So then a few years after that, we upgraded the system, same company, Seeing Eye, but now we use the Fovio system. And you can see that the tracking equipment aren't little cameras with lenses anymore. And we used to have to separate, put in different lenses and figure out the distance and what lens would be appropriate and the various filters, and it was all very complicated. Now it's just a tube. So it's a nice little tube that you just plop down in front of them, and you don't have to worry about adjusting the height and the direction of each of the, I think it was 3 cameras on each stand. And then we also have the webcams now are underneath the tubes. So we have the webcams capturing the scene, the tubes, the Fovio tubes capturing the eye gaze. We have 4 laptops in the room, if you can believe that. 2 are running the eye tracking equipment with the software for that, and 2 are running the webcams. So lots of equipment in there. And then we also have a tripod still capturing kind of both interlocutors, because the webcams will capture what each person's looking at, but it doesn't capture both of them together. So if we wanted to know, does someone lean in and the other person leans in, that's why we have the webcam at the side of the room. So that's kind of our current setup. We last used them pre-pandemic, I think. So pre-pandemic, we collected a large corpus, which I'm going to tell you about in a minute. And since then, we haven't used them because face-to-face research just started going back to be allowed by our university last winter. So we were prohibited from doing any face-to-face research for most of the pandemic. Probably true at your university as well. Did that happen to you or not really? Yeah. Okay. It's like, no, you can't do face-to-face research. So we all swapped out to doing online things instead. Okay, so the Lindbergh study, kind of to situate this in the big picture of what we're doing, it's looking not so much at an interactional phenomenon. So it's not about recast, it's not about non-understanding, it's not about pattern learning. It's about anxiety. So another whole strand of interaction research has looked at these individual variables, right? Does anxiety, your willingness to communicate, your engagement, your motivation, like all of those factors that can play a role in the extent to which you engage in interaction, or to, you know, whether or not you benefit from it. And so she wanted to look at anxiety. And oh, I forgot to show you in the little picture. Yeah. So did you see the are they there? Can you see them? Oh, I have it on the other side. Good. Okay, so I'll show you the actual sensors that they use. So she wanted to look at that, and we had these sensors that they had on their fingers, and we're like, why don't you do something with that sensor data, Rachel? Rachel's like, okay. So she looked at anxiety and sensor data. And we wanted to look at nonverbals. So what is going on? What does anxiety look like? So basically, just like we wanted to know, what does a recast look like? What does, non-understanding look like? We also want, well, what does anxiety look like? Okay, so what does it look like non-verbally? Because again, this is a useful thing to know. So if you know that, oh, okay, if people start doing this face, it means they don't understand. If someone does this face, that they're giving you a recast. If someone's doing this face, they're anxious. Like, we just feel like this is kind of useful, potentially useful information to have. So we knew that there were some things associated with anxiety already, and we just wanted to say, okay, well, is that happening in interaction? Because most of those studies hadn't been looking at like kind of, I mean, it's a lab context, so it's not natural, but just chit chat. So bringing people together and saying, hey, have a conversation, what goes on. All right, so one of the last slides. Where did the data come from? Okay, so the data came from the selfie corpus. And so the selfie corpus is something that Pavel and I put together right before the pandemic. It's 224 paired conversations. So that's a lot of people to bring into our lab. And it's all L2 English students talking to each other. So some of our eye movement related interaction research initially had been participants who we brought into the lab to interact with research assistants. But we thought, you know what? We don't want to look at research assistants anymore because they usually know what we're doing, even though we tell them just behave naturally. They know what we're looking at and they know what interactional features we're interested in. And sometimes we even had told them, give them feedback or point to this. So, to a certain extent, they had been told what to do. And so we wanted more naturalistic conversation where it's just people chatting, where neither one of them has been told to do anything. It's just, here's the task, do it. So we've got all these people together. They're typical university students. Most of them were at Concordia, but some were at other Montreal universities like UQAM, University of Montreal, or McGill. We randomly assigned them to interact with someone from a different LM background. So we wanted to make sure that, English was their shared language of communication and they couldn't go back to the L1. And then gender, I know it's a weird thing to still be talking about in terms of male-female-ness. I'm sure like many of you have switched your how you elicit information about gender to an open-ended question, which is something more along the lines of how would you describe your gender, as opposed to are you male, female, tick one, okay? So, or other, like that very friendly other box. So this was before we had switched over how we asked people to identify their gender. So basically everyone reported that they were either male or female. And so we just took that self-reported information and made sure we had mixed gender and same gender pairing. And then they did 3 tasks. So where did we come up with these tasks? Problems encountered with moving to a new city. That's what we call the moving to Quebec task. We thought that one might be a good way to start because these were all students who were not from Quebec and all had to move to Quebec. So they all experienced the joy of navigating a new city. And we thought, okay, well, their task was what were some problems you had and how could we, what are some solutions for future students moving to Quebec? Then we went with a close call narrative, and close call narratives, those are right out of like sociolinguistic sociology research where you're saying, describe an event where something dangerous or potentially dangerous or exciting happened to you and you had a near miss with some type of danger. And then the third one, we thought, oh, let's have them do something more academic. So we asked them to read these short summaries of research articles and share them with each other and then discuss them because we thought, well, these are university students, let's have them do something that bears some resemblance to what they might do in class. Okay, and what we did, I'm laughing because these poor people, right? These poor people, look what we made them do. We're so evil. Okay, so we had audio recordings. We had an audio recorder tucked away on the table. We had the video recordings from the tripod. We had the eye gaze tracking from the Fovio system. We had skin conductance, and you can see that on the finger of the hand there on the left, the top picture there. So it's really easy. It's just a little Velcro strip that you put on the finger of the non-dominant hand, and then it straps to the wrist also with Velcro, and on the wrist there's like a battery pack and stuff like that, and the wires connect them. So all 224 pairs, so that's however many times 2 people wore these, because we had 2 of them. After each of the 3 tasks, they had to rate themselves and their partner in terms of how motivated they felt, anxiety, flow, which we defined in terms of fluency, comprehensibility, collaboration. That was after each task. And then when they finished all 3 tasks, we made them rate these variables here. So how friendly the partner was, whether or not the partner used nonverbals, all these types of things. Then we had them do a stimulated recall session on the final task. So whatever task they did last, they got separated into different rooms with a different RA to do a stimulated recall using the video that we had taken. Then after that, they did some trait kind of questionnaires, anxiety, motivation, their social networks, their degree of acculturation. Then we had a working memory task, which was a backwards digit span. And then after that, there was like a debriefing interview where we're just like, so how'd that go? And we could ask a bit more probing questions. So that is the massive data set that we have for the entire corpus. I have to say we haven't used the vast majority of this data. So we if someone comes along, one of our grad students says, hey, I'm interested in that, we're like, okay, why don't you use this data and why don't you use that data? So when Rachel came along and was like, I want to use the skin conductance data because I think it's really cool and nobody had used it yet. You're like, yeah, go ahead. So she used that, and then she also used the rating scale after each task. She used the anxiety kind of self ratings. And then she also used some of the rating scales after all 3 tasks to show that, they weren't too freaked out about the equipment, overall, they were happy with the partner, just to kind of rule out, or just to kind of give a sense that, yeah, everybody seemed to be okay with whoever they were talking to. And then she used the anxiety questionnaire as part of her study. Yeah, so that is basically what she did and what she used. And then her sample was just 60 conversations. So we have 224. She used 60 of them. And she picked ones who had done the moving to Quebec task first because she didn't want whatever had happened in the previous tasks to affect how they felt about each other. So this was the first task. We knew that most of the participants felt it was one of the easier tasks of the 3. It gave them opportunities to talk about their personal experiences. I mean, you don't really have much of a chance to talk about your personal experience when you're discussing, nature versus nurture. There was also potential for emotionally charged content because we were asking about their personal experiences and obstacles they'd faced when they came to Montreal. And it was also interactive. So out of the 3 tasks, it was the one that most resembled kind of back and forth conversation. The close call narratives, of course, were I'm telling you my story, you're listening. And then the discussion task was more like, I'm going to tell you about my study, you tell me about your study, and then we're going to interact. So this one actually had the most kind of back and forth throughout the whole thing. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing there.
My question is very simple, but you collected so much data for the study, and I'm wondering how long it took for you to analyze all the data, and how many research assistants helped you to complete the project.
It took a village, basically. It took, I think, 2 semesters of data collection. During data collection, we needed 3 RAs in the room. Each session took 2 hours. So we had a pair come to the lab. They were there for 2 hours. We needed 3 RAs in the room. One was kind of the hi, come on in, da 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 da. You know, do these forms, whatever. Another one was monitoring the eye gaze data. So it was on the laptops, but we also had a screen share set up in the other room so that the RAs could leave the room and they could monitor the eye gaze and come in and be like, hey, you guys are moving too much, or hey, you just moved your chair off the dots. We told you to keep your chair on. So one person was doing that. And then the third one was kind of hanging out, waiting to administer some of the tests, right? So when they finished the data collection, they had to do the working memory tests, right? So someone was there to administer those. And then while that person was doing that, the other person was doing the stimulated recall. And then the third person was kind of monitoring the next group of people that was coming in. So it was just like this massive endeavor of 3 to 4 RAs doing that. And of course, when each session was only 2 hours, they only could do, based on the times when university students are willing to come in and do this, about 3 sessions per day. That was 6 hours. So we had like 2 teams. So there was like 6 RAs who were doing the data collection. 2 that were primarily responsible for eye tracking. So that was their job. They were the ones who felt the most comfortable with the eye tracking. So one of them had to be there for every session. And then the other 4 could cycle in and out based on availability. So that's how many it took just to get the data, which took about a whole year. How many transcribers did we have? Wow. I would say probably 10 people minimum who were just transcribing the audio files. And every audio file had to be transcribed and then checked by another RA for accuracy to correct any mistakes. So I'd say 10 to 15 RAs just to transcribe the audio files, which took probably a year and a half to get all that done because it was a lot. And they also had to transcribe the stimulated recalls and the debriefing interviews. So that took a long time. And then there was the actual analysis. So that's just prepping the data, getting the data and prepping the data to be used. And then after that, it became project by project. So if Pavel and I say wanted to do a non-understanding study, then we would probably put 2 RAs on that, you know, pulling the eye gaze, syncing the videos, coding the video. So 2 to 3 RAs per project. Everything that we published it had at least 2 or 3 RAs on it. It's very labor intensive, right? There's a lot of hours in this corpus. Yeah, it was a lot of work to get it all set up. But here's the good news. The good news is that once you have it, it is an endless supply of fun. So it's all there. And when the pandemic hit, and we couldn't do face-to-face anymore, we were like, well, that's a good thing we're sitting on a corpus of 224 face-to-face paired interactions for which we have a ton of data. So basically the whole pandemic, we were using that data. So we've been using it for years now, probably three years of looking at different aspects of the data. And I'm only talking about the ones that involve something to do with interaction-y stuff and nonverbals. There's also stuff we're using the corpus for that have nothing to do with that, like fluency. There's been a lot of fluency studies going on. We've looked at some pragmatic stuff about disagreements, like you name it. It's just pretty much free for all. We did have to, during the pandemic, we switched to a lot of rating studies. So that's where we would take data from the corpus and do something to it and then ask people to rate it. And this we could do during Lime Survey. So we just set everything up through Lime Survey, and we could keep doing new studies, even though we couldn't do anything face to face. Yeah. Sorry, that was a really long answer to your question. Anyone else? I'm sorry, you broke out a little bit. Would you mind asking me again?
Yeah, he's just saying that he understands how labor intensive it was, and I think how impressive it is.
Crazy. Yeah, it's crazy. Well, can I just tell you a funny story? So, so I don't know. Do you guys know the American Association for Corpus Linguistics Conference? No. Do you have anyone at MSU who does corpus stuff? No, not really. Yeah, you do. Okay, were you there? Were you there at the last one in Flagstaff in September?
No, I haven't been yet. I haven't been able to go yet.
Okay, so it's a really cool conference. It's a small conference. It's all corpus researchers. And you're like, well, Kim, why were you there? I'm not really a corpus researcher, but I'm like, hey, selfie, it's a corpus, right? So we were there, and one of the, who was it? Oh, Steffi Wolf gave a plenary where she was saying, when we create corpora, we have to get more information from the participants. Like, we are not gathering enough information from the people who are providing us with written text or oral text. We just don't know enough about these people. And then the next day, I got to go do my talk where I got to show that slide where it's like, this is all the data we have from the people in our corpus. So it was very like, yay, we're actually doing something right from a corpus linguistics perspective, which is unusual because neither Pavel nor I are corpus linguists, actually. But yeah, there's a lot there and there's a lot to exploit, and we still have students exploiting it even now. So it was a worthwhile investment despite all the resources. And let's not even talk about how many pairs lost data for some reason, right? The eye tracker goes down, someone forgot to turn on the audio. Our favorite was someone didn't show up, right? Because these are in pairs. You have to have both people show up or you can't run the experiment. It's conversation, right? So we were, my lab was over in it's called the Hall building. It's the busiest building for classrooms on campus. And so the RAs are like, okay, someone didn't show up. So they would roam the halls and be like, hey, are you free for an hour? Do you want to come do this experiment? People would be like, no, I'm eating lunch, or yeah, okay, I can give you an hour or whatever. So they just take these random students from the hallway and have them fill in because somebody didn't show up. So we're about to run a new data collection because face-to-face is allowed again. And so one of the questions the RAs asked was, are we doing the run around the hall building, find a replacement procedure again? And I'm like, yes, you are. Yeah, scheduling is often the hardest part. Yeah. Any other questions at this point?
Oh.
Okay. I just have a quick question about the selfie corpus, because I'm doing corpus linguistics here, but I haven't had to develop my own yet, but I might need to. So I wonder just if you have any advice for keeping everything organized and really, robust when you're collecting the data, because I can imagine, it could be easy for that to get, a little mixed up or something. So I wonder if you've had anything in your experiences that you could share with that.
Well, we have very detailed procedures. So every time a study is run, there is a multi-page Word document about steps. Before the participant arrives, do X, Y, Z, during the procedure, do this. How to save the file names, where to put the files, how to label them, after the participant leaves, do this, So I think it's just a matter of being a little bit anal retentive before you begin, okay? Which is very like, this is the spreadsheet. This is how the data has to be entered. This is the folder where you need to put the audio files. This is the folder where you need to put the video files. This is the folder. This is the spreadsheet where, the working memory test, we had it scored in real time. So the RA was just sitting there scoring it as they did it. That's where the scores go. As the participants were doing conversations, the RAs would be entering the previous participants' questionnaires, all in the spreadsheet. So it was just especially with the eye tracking stuff, it was like, okay, this is how you calibrate. These are the steps you have to do. Make sure that then along with the troubleshooting, if this happens, check that. If this happens, check that. We always start with some type of procedure like that, but then as the first couple of weeks of data collection, we add to it because things happen that we didn't anticipate. And so we're like, oops, should have thought of that before. And we often try to pilot test. So we will have, because we have so many RAs, like any given time, we've got 10 to 12 running around between the two of us, we will get other RAs to be the pilot tests, right? So right now we're about to do a study on the liking gap or the likability gap, which will be face-to-face. So we have the 4 RAs running it, and then we had 4 other RAs who are not involved in the project really come, and they have to do the whole run through as if they're participants, right? And then that way we can be like, oh, okay, right, what if that happens? And so it's really, I think, just taking the time before you start to really think about, okay, how exactly is this gonna run? And who's responsible for various tasks, right? Like someone had to be responsible for randomizing the tasks and deciding in what order the tasks were going to be done, right? So who's going to do that, right? How are they going to communicate that to the people running the experiment? So it's very detailed procedures, yeah, and a lot of thinking about, wait, how do we need information stored? Where do we need it stored? And who's responsible for putting it that way? And then another thing, if you're doing, we always have like a core group of like usually our PhD students, sometimes an MA student who's probably going to come on and do a PhD with us as kind of our core people who have access to everything. But then we also hire some people to just transcribe things, okay? For us, it's really important to make sure that those people only have access to the things that they need and not everything else, right? Because it minimizes the possibility that one of them might delete some files or mess with the system, right? So you do have to do a lot of kind of data dispersing, like, okay, you're a transcriber, you need these audio files. Here's the 20 audio files we want you to transcribe. You need to have them done by this date. Get them back. Okay, you're done. Here's 20 more, and then you have to be tracking of who's doing what, right? So it's basically just being really organized, very detailed, and planning it all in advance, and then adjusting during your pilot testing. Yeah. But yeah, I don't know if that's helpful at all or if that's just common sense, but that's how we made it work.
Yeah, that is helpful. Thank you so much.
I'll be really quick about my question. So I know interaction. So like in interaction, I think it's important to to know the proficiency level of each participant. So did you get to put that like a proficiency level as a moderating factor, or was that just randomly assigned?
Randomly assigned, yeah, randomly assigned. So we know, because most of them are at Concordia, we know what the basic proficiency requirement is for them to get into the university. So we know that their minimum, the bare minimum they had when they got here had to be X. So we knew that. We also asked them as part of the background information score to tell us what was your last proficiency test that you took. Did you take IELTS? Did you take TOEFL? Duolingo wasn't a thing then, so that wasn't one of them. But there's a Canadian test, CALE test, the Michigan test. So there's all these different proficiency tests they might have taken. So we asked them to report that and their score. Most of them, I'd say 2/3 of them actually gave us that information. About 1/3 of them didn't, usually because they can't remember. So we have that, but I'm not sure how useful it is, because the last time they took a proficiency test was before they applied to the university. And some of them have been here for 2, 3, 4 years. So how informative is it to know what score they got on a standardized test 3 or 4 years ago, right? But we have it. We often will report it. We'll say, out of, say there are 100 participants from Selfie, we had reported proficiency scores from 2/3 of them, and this was their mean IELTS score, this was their mean TOEFL score. So we can include it, and reviewers frequently ask for it. They're like, why does it matter? It doesn't even make sense to ask, but we provide it because they want it. But I think it's a tricky thing when you're dealing with university students, because the time from they took the test to the time that you're interacting with them can be quite long. So I'm not sure how informative it is. I think if you wanted to do something where proficiency was a variable of interest for you, like you really wanted to be able to classify people in your corpus based on some type of proficiency, because it's really important for the design of your corpus or the design of your experimental study, then you almost need to give them a proficiency test as part of data collection, right? Because otherwise you're asking them to remember, to self-report, or you're going into the university system, if you have permission to do that, to pull their TOEFL or IELTS score that they used when they applied. But that can be years from when you're actually talking to them. Yeah, so proficiency is a tricky thing.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I think if you're looking at very gross operationalizations of proficiency, like university degree seeking student, intensive English student, then I think it's a fair comparison, because these are people who have met the minimum requirements to be in a university, and these are people who haven't. But I wouldn't want to try and look at our corpus and tease apart who's higher or lower proficiency. Now, we can tease it apart for more specific variables based on their performance, right? So we can say, these are the fluent ones, these are the less fluent ones, based on objective measures of fluency or perceived fluency as rated by someone else. We can also say, these are the more comprehensible ones, and these are the less comprehensible ones, because we can ask raters to listen to them and rate them. So we can impose categories or groups upon the people in the corpus for a specific measure by just asking raters to assess something about them, right? So if that were important, you could say, well, I need very comprehensible and less comprehensible learners. I want to compare them. Then, okay, well, let's pick a bunch of files, have them rated, and then you can pick the people, you know, if you need 30 people with very high comprehensibility scores and 30 people with low comprehensibility scores, then you can do that. Yeah. Any more questions while we're chatting? Eileen's got a question, yay!
It's actually following up on Steve's question. So very massive effort, and impressive how you described it. Even when you're describing it in that much detail, you're like, wow, yeah, this is a massive undertaking. What about any measures of quality control? How did you handle that with so many people contributing to this project, different parts? Some of
You
them.
mean the participants' quality or the RA quality?
Yeah, RA quality sounds
Weird.
friendly, yeah. But I meant, yeah, quality of data collection and data transcription, basically the data you're getting. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good one. Unfortunately, we do have to fire people. So, you know, we would train, especially for the eye tracking. It's like, we need people who can run this equipment and run the procedures and get things set up. And so after a couple training sessions and a couple trials with non-live participants, I mean, with our people, if an RA could not successfully operate or get reliable eye tracking, then they were asked to do something else in the project. So they could be someone who did the working memory, or they could be a person who transcribed, but they couldn't, they just couldn't. So what we usually do is we usually have a senior PhD student, so a third or fourth year PhD student as project manager. And they're the one who works most closely with us about what we want, how we want it done, formulates that lab manual procedures about how things are going to go, trains the other people and how things should happen, and also is the person who then reports back to us, like, okay, you got to move this person off of this, and you got to. So we have kind of quality control at the level of at the beginning of the project when we're getting ready to go, about what's the best place for the personnel we have in terms of what needs to be done. And then we also have that project manager periodically checking in, like we'll randomly check, how does the eye tracking data look when these two people are running the procedure? Okay, how does it look when these two people are running the procedure? And kind of following up, that kind of thing. So that's how we get the data. And for the transcription, Oh, yeah, that can be tough because, you know, you give them transcribing conventions, you ask for it to be formatted a certain way, you give them the audio files, and you get back stuff where you're like, what is this? It bears no resemblance to what we asked you to do. So again, that's often me. I'm usually the transcriber contact person. I'm the one who's kind of quality controlling on the transcript. So I'm checking them and I'm saying, hey, you missed this, you missed that, you missed the other. I need you to go back and do that again. Please work on this. Please follow. So I'm kind of working with the transcribers to make sure that they're doing what we want. And then as a second check, found it's very important to have the transcripts once they're done checked by somebody else. So another RA who didn't do the initial transcript receives the transcript and the audio file, and their job is to go through it again and make sure that the first transcriber didn't miss anything. And often that's how we tell that someone needs to be moved off of transcribing. So if I didn't catch it in the initial kind of training phase, when the verifier comes by and says, hey, this person's transcripts, I'm finding huge chunks of conversation are just missing, or this person is not using any, like whatever the issue is, then we either retrain that person or we fire them, basically, depending on how amenable they are to being retrained, right? Yeah, so, and then like questionnaire coding and data entry on questionnaires, there's usually someone doing that and then someone else checking it to make sure that data has been entered, that items that were supposed to be reverse scored were actually reverse scored. Yeah, so that's why there's so many people involved, because there's a lot of doing and then checking and rechecking. Yeah, I don't know if that answers your question or not.
It does. Yeah.
Oh, and then everything, whenever we're actually doing a study and something has to be coded, we always have some type of reliability checking. So if it's a more complicated coding, not complicated, but more subjective. Like right now, actually, we're looking at some data from this corpus, and it's nonverbals. They're coding the nonverbals. So was there a blink? Was there a nod? Was there a tilt? And they have all these categories. And two people each did half of it. So I don't know how many, they each did, let's say 30 videos. And then inter-rater reliability person came and did like half of each of theirs. Okay. And we're getting terrible reliability. And we're just like, this is unacceptable. Like, we are not moving forward with this low level of reliability in terms of our key variable, which is nonverbals. So now the two RAs that initially had done 50% each are not having to go back and together watch all the videos, come to consensus about exactly what's going on, resolve any disagreements, be extremely clear in what they think is happening in these videos. So we have two people who are going to reach 100% agreement with each other through discussion. Then we're going to get a new person, not the person who did it before, but a new person to go in and do inter-rater reliability on 25% of that jointly kind of agreed upon data after training from the two that did it using updated training materials. So there is some quality control going on in the coding end as well. And that would be, and we do that with the eye gaze data, with code, and pretty much anything that is kind of tricky. We always have to have someone do it, someone else check it. If necessary, two people do it, then a third check it. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know why we do this research. It's way too labor intensive, right? What were we thinking? I don't know why we thought this was a good idea. Yeah.
I have a question kind of related to like how the different data types work together. So regarding like the video cameras that you have set up, or I think you call them webcams, and the eye tracking data, like how do you match those timestamps to know, okay, they were looking at this person's eyes during this time, and we can see their posture or whatever nonverbal features during that?
Yes, we use the software. It's called Captive, and it comes from the same company that Seeing Eye company that produces the eye trackers. trackers, and one of the great RA tasks is to sync the videos. So someone has to go in after all of this data collection. We don't sync them all. I don't remember if we've synced everything or if we just sync it as we need it, right? So when we've decided this is our sample for a particular study, one of the RAs has to go in and sync the videos so that we can watch both faces at the same time with the eye gaze dots moving around, along with like, controls or things you can use to, and we manually code in 40 millisecond segments. So we look at the video, this segment, what was going on, this segment, what was going on, this segment, what was going on. So all of that has to kind of get synced. And then the GSR data, so the sensor data, can get synced with that as well. So what, I actually might have a slide. Let me see if I have a slide. Who else? Rachel kindly gave me, I was like, Rachel, any visuals on this study? She's like, yeah, I presented it at Slurf a few years ago. I got something. Oh, here it is. Okay, so let me just quickly share my screen. It might help, it might not. Let's see. Where is it here? Okay. Okay, so, there. No, there. There. Okay. So it kind of looks like this. So this is how Rachel kind of did the arousals with what was going on. So she had to sync the videos for both participants so she could see both of them and what they were both doing. You can also barely see the green dot on their face. That's where they were looking from the eye gaze. So the scene camera is what you can see there, the picture. So it's what the other one was looking at, right? So the bottom woman was looking at the top woman, the top woman was looking at the bottom woman. So the dot on the bottom woman's face is the eye gaze of the top woman, and vice versa. And so we can see, did they lean forward? Did they move? Did they tilt? And how does it align with what the other person was doing? And then so we have the synced videos that we use a lot. And then what Rachel did was bring in the GSR data at the same timestamps. So she could see the the micro Siemens going up and down. And then she could tell from the program, it identified, it classified all of these kind of responses as high, mid-high, medium, mid-low, and low. And so she would then look at, well, what are the high arousals? That's what she was interested in. And then she would go to like a 1 to 3 second gap before that. And then she would go to the videos and say, okay, what was going on in the videos 1 to 3 seconds before this arousal episode that we see. And she did that for the lows and the highs. I'm gonna stop sharing so I can see you better. There we go. Yeah, does that help answer at all?
Yeah, that's great. That's really cool, actually. And then I also have just another more general question about the eye tracker itself. Because I've honestly never seen an eye tracker like this. And I think I saw the Post-it notes where it looks like you might have used those to calibrate. So I was just wondering how that whole procedure looked, because it's very different from a typical eye tracking setup.
Oh yeah, this is great if you want let's call it a gross measure of eye movements during conversation, because it is a 4-point calibration, and it's kind of here, 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 and here. So you kind of ask, just the 4 points around the person's face, like a square box, and that's it. So it's really great for telling you kind of basic information about where the gaze is. But if you actually wanted to do something about processing, this would be a terrible eye tracker. I mean, they have way more points of calibration, right? And you're looking at tiny little movements of the eyes towards, words and back again, and way more sophisticated stuff, because the questions you're asking require very sophisticated measurements, right? Whereas our IR tracker is not looking at those very sophisticated things. It's looking at much more. How many times did they look at the person's face? Were they looking in the upper region or the lower region? So what we can do, the software allows us to divide the face into quadrants. right? So we could say how many looks were there to the top versus the bottom. We could say how many looks to the eye region versus the mouth region. Like, so we can impose areas of the face to know how many looks and how long were those looks to different parts of the face, but we cannot with at no sense say, you know, what exactly were the eyeballs doing? We don't know. And it was kind of, this company made this system for driving simulate to find out what people were doing when they were driving, right? So it would attach to the dashboard of a car, either a simulated car while you were driving or an actual car. So it was kind of designed not for, you know, not for us, not for language research, but it was designed more for practical applications out in the real world, where they didn't really need to know real sophisticated stuff about what the eyes were doing. You know, it was more for a gross measure of where people looking when different things happen. So for us, it works well because we're asking very general questions about a very large construct, but it would not work well for smaller questions about smaller constructs, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so. And I think it kind of reminds me a little bit of like the research done with the glasses, like eye tracking glasses.
Yes.
Yeah. So I was also just trying to relate it to that and like how they're similar. But yeah, that was great. It's really cool.
If I were to do this all over again, I would buy the glasses. Except the glasses didn't really exist when we first started doing this. Those were relatively newer. But yeah, I would get the glasses because those seem really cool to me, and people can walk around, right?
Mhm.
Like you can put them out there in the world.
Yeah.
It's cool, as opposed to, I mean, our system is nice that people can move around a little bit. It's not like, don't move your head. Like you can move some, but you can't like move way far out of range or like go over here. So you still are a little bit limited in how much you can move. But I think the glasses are cool. Yeah.
Yeah, I also just have a really quick follow-up question. Sorry. I'm really interested in this. It's cool. So like I'm thinking of how much I nod based on like how much I'm understanding. So like sometimes if I'm like really into it, I'll like do a really big nod. Would that like hurt the eye tracking data? Like would you miss the okay. Yeah, that's cool too.
Yeah. Because again, the box is kind of like here, it's shoulders and then like top of your head. So if you're doing a big nod, you're still in range.
Okay.
Yeah. And side, and we can do leans and stuff like that. But yeah, you really actually have to move your chair out of range.
Okay.
Yeah, but sometimes people do as part of conversation, they kind of just get comfortable. So they start kicking back in their chair and they sit on their chair back and they cross their legs and then whoever's monitoring the eye tracking data has to come in and say, I'm sorry, but could you please, go back to sitting, put your chair back to the pieces of tape on the floor. Yeah. For us, the eye gaze is never the primary focus, right? It's never just the only thing we're looking at. It's always that plus some type of nonverbal, plus some type of measure of what's going on in the conversation, plus something else. So I think that's partly because the things that we're interested in are bigger things that you can't just answer by just looking at eye movements. The other thing is our setup was always designed to track two people simultaneously during conversation, because that's what we were interested in. We wanted to know not just what one person is doing, but what two people are doing and how what they're both doing is interacting, right? Because that's what we wanted to know about. So I totally lost my thread. What were we talking about? Oh, I'm not an eye tracking researcher. Yeah, so I think what we do, I think, is useful because it provides another perspective on the phenomenon that we're looking at, but it's not. I don't think it's the primary thing. If that makes sense. Like in this study, we were really interested mostly in anxiety and the galvanic skin responses. That was our primary focus. But we're like, well, nonverbals can play a role in that. So let's look at it. Let's see if there's something going on with where people are looking when they're nervous versus not, or anxious versus not. Again, part of that, what do things look like, right? That's what we're really interested in, is what do things look like? Like, what does disfluency look like? One of the studies we're doing right now, okay, yes, is about nonverbals during fluency. And so if you're being disfluent and you're pausing and you look away versus look down or use a gesture or all the different nonverbals you could do while being disfluent, does that have anything to do with how people perceive your fluency? The answer is yes. I don't remember the details because that was at the last lab meeting. I can't remember. But yes, it does. There are some nonverbals that if you do them, people will not mind, and they'll be like, oh yeah, that's just it's fine. It's fine that they were pausing there. It's no big deal because, you know, they were maintaining eye contact and we're doing this gesture type thing. That's fine. I don't think of them as being just as not having good fluency because they did that. But there are some things like when you're doing disfluent that people are like, oh yeah, that's not good. So again, it's not so much that we want to know about eye gaze. We want to know about disfluency and how people are perceived, and what eye gaze might be doing that impacts whether or not they're perceived as being fluent. Because again, that we think that's kind of useful information, right? You can tell people, hey, when you have to pause, don't do this, because if you do, people are going to have a negative reaction to you. You know, do this instead. You're like, oh, okay. You know, if you're having a conversation and you want to make your interlocutor feel comfortable and you notice they're doing this, it means they didn't understand you. So self-repair, so they don't have to ask you, okay? And on a tangent, we actually wanted to know, we published this yet? No, it's in review. So we have a study in review. We did it last winter where all that research on holds. We're like, okay, who cares unless this is usable information? So we're like, okay, let's see if this is usable information. So we got business communication students here at Concordia because communication skills are highly valued by employers for business students. Like, they're going out into the world to interact in business situations. They need these soft skills of how to interact. And employer surveys are always telling business faculty, the students you're graduating don't have communication skills that we need. We need you to work on their soft skills. So we're like, all right, let's see if we can teach them anything about nonverbals during understanding. So because it was still the pandemic, we set up this 4-week Moodle course where we took all these videos from our corpus about holds and what's a hold and how do you know if someone's doing a hold, and, you know, what does holds look like and why are these important, within a bigger kind of instructional unit about the importance of nonverbal behavior, facial expressions, all that kind of thing. And of course, we pre-tested, post-tested them in their ability to recognize a hold, the onset and the release of the hold, whether it's a signal of lack of comprehension. And yeah, compared to a control group who didn't do our instructional modules, yeah, they got better at recognizing when a listener doesn't understand, which is great because they're going to need that in their future lives in the business world, is they need to know when they're in a meeting and someone doesn't understand them, they need to be able to recognize that so they can, you know, remediate themselves. But also interesting was of course, we got qualitative data from them as well, how much they were like, wow, this is really important. Why isn't anyone teaching us this in school? And this was so cool because after I learned about this, I started paying attention to the nonverbals of the people around me. And I could really tell now when people didn't understand me, and I started to be able to be a better communicator. And we're like, cool. That's what we're really ultimately about. It's like, okay, let's figure this stuff out and then try and help people be better interactors by not just what's going on with language, verbal language, but what's going on with nonverbal language as well. Yeah. So it was the first one we did, and we focused on non-understanding, but who knows what we'll do next for teaching people about the nonverbal aspects of communication.